I'm going to share with you 3 expert tips for working with color. Let's face it, working with color in Photoshop or any program for that matter is not a very easy thing to do. We think it's simple because we take color photos, right? But there's a lot of things that we can do in our images that are going to exploit the colors to create mood and emotion and feelings with our viewers that we need to do with our images. And it's not always easy to control that because we all don't have a really strong grasp on color theory. While you may not have a world of time to dive into all the color theory concepts, there are some things that you can do right now that are going to make your images exponentially better when working with color. The first tip I have for you is start really heavy, like really heavy-handed, and then dial it down. So we're looking at a photograph here of Kansas City. It is beautiful in Kansas City in the springtime. The red buds back here are just on fire. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to let's just add something like a selective color adjustment layer. Now, I'm not going to go too far into the weeds on what the selective color adjustment does, but I am going to show you my thought process on how I edit the colors in the image using the selective color adjustment layer. So the way I think about this, the way I look at this, I'm going to start with the sky. With the sky, do I want more cyan in it? You see, I bring it all the way up to see what it's going to look like, and then all the way down to see what it looks like. So I might bring that down a little bit. How about magenta? All the way up, bring it down. Add some magenta in there, gives it some contrast. Yellow, bring it down, bring it up. Not a whole lot of difference there. Let's take a look at something like the yellows or even the greens. The greens might deal with the grass here. Let's see. If we take magenta out, it makes that grass look awesome, but also kind of like some toxic stuff there. So let's not do that. Let's see if we increase the cyan a little bit there to balance, maybe adding some more of that green and then adding a little bit more yellow to that green. Let's see what happens here as we increase as far as we can go with these individual colors. We do the same thing with our magenta. Bring it all the way up, bring it all the way down. You see how we're getting a big spread of color? At some point, when you're moving the slider back and forth while you're doing this, your eye's going to say, hey, Blake, stop, all right? That looks good right there. It's my eye telling me by going back and forth what it likes and what it sees in the image. Now, if we look at the before and the after, our greens look better, our blues look better. Let's take a look at the reds. Same concept. Do I want more cyan in the red? No, because these beautiful buildings in Kansas City, these brick buildings now become brown. So let's bring this down and look, we take away cyan from those reds, and really that helps the red just pop. Let's see what happens. We round them off with a little bit of magenta in there, and then maybe add a little bit of yellow to those reds. Now, before and after. Here's the before, here's the after. Now, what I would do here at this point is a subtle mix here. Maybe say, okay, that's a little too much. Let's go ahead and bring the opacity down a little bit to get a little bit of the best of both worlds. But I start heavy, really heavy-handed, and then I slowly taper down. I do that with almost every setting that I do, not just with the color work that I do. The second piece of advice I have for you is to limit your color palette. So yes, we're working with color, but we want to make sure that we limit that color palette so we're not trying to do too much with the colors. Here's a perfect example of an image where we've done entirely too much with the color, where we say to ourselves, yeah, let's get some color in there. And I'm thinking, no, that's way too much color in there. Ideally, what you would want to do here is select the colors that you do want to exaggerate, the colors that you do want to exploit, and let those ones pop forward while you keep the other ones at bay. I'll give you an example of this. This image is from Agate Beach. Now, if you look at the color palette here, it is a very dominant color palette in the analogous colors here of magenta through blue, meaning I'm not using the entire color wheel to exploit this image. I'm only using the colors that it needs to get my point across. Now, if we look at the before image, it doesn't really have a whole lot of color there. I did some other work there. Yeah, I made the lighthouse bigger. I might have added a moon, whatever. But you see the color here. It's just not quite as vibrant as it could be, where I wanted to focus on those colors specifically to make them boost, to make that viewer feel something when they see it. Here's another example of this. This is from Second Beach in Olympic National Park. Looking at this image, there are 2 dominant colors here. It's not an analogous color scheme. Actually, this is what will be called a complementary color scheme, where you have 2 colors that are on the opposite side of the color wheel from one another that are basically balancing one another to create that drama or that mood or that tension or whatever it might be in the image. Now, if we look at the original before from this is what the original exposure looked like. Not that great. Obviously, it needed some straightening, but the color just wasn't there. So by adding some of that color in, those darker blues and maybe even a little bit of those oranges, really balances out the piece. Now, how do we know what colors are there? Well, what you can do is you can take an HSL adjustment layer and just slam that saturation all the way up. And this will basically tell us which are our dominant colors in the image. Our dominant colors are going to be the oranges and the blues in the image. Obviously, it's not going to look good in any way, shape, or form as we move that HSL adjustment layer up. That's just to assess what colors we have in our photograph. Here's another great example. Now, this example, we have many colors happening here. You might be thinking, well, Blake, there's a lot of color here. How is this in any way, shape, or form in some form of harmony? Well, this is what we actually call a triadic color scheme, where you can see the magentas and the subtle, deeper, almost ultramarine style purples in the sky that balance very well with the greens in the foreground. But then we have this third color in here, which is the yellow / orangish color that is helping the piece and unifying the piece and tying it all together. Again, a limited color palette. If we look at the original of this one, it didn't really have a whole lot of that there. So did I force that color in there? Maybe. I definitely exploited it. Because I wanted the viewer to feel something when they saw this image. So yes, there was a little bit of exploitation in those colors, but otherwise you don't connect with the piece, right? That's why color is important. The last example I have of this is a great example because this doesn't necessarily follow a rule. Now, we do have what looks like could be complementary colors with the blue and the orange or yellowish colors, depending on which color wheel you're looking at. And also another one here with the magentas and the greens. Now, if we actually look at a color wheel here, what we're actually going to see here is that this has a complementary color scheme that's very dominant with the blues and the oranges, but it has these two accents that come in here that are your magenta or purple and green. So does it fit any of those color theory color schemes? Maybe not, but it works. So yes, there are rules here. You can follow some rules for triadic examples, for tetradic examples, and split complementary and analogous. Yes, those are all rules, but sometimes there's images that just work. The point here is that you're going to look at the colors in the image that you want to exploit and make sure you dial in on those colors and leave the other ones just pushed back a little bit. If we look at the original of this exposure, it doesn't have much color in it at all. I definitely had to work with color in this image to create that mood, that feeling, that tension, that drama with the individual that looks at it. The third piece of advice I have for you, which is probably the most important piece of advice that I have for you, is that after you've worked with the color in your image, I want you to walk away. I want you to walk away. So this is a photograph that I've been working on. It's in my portfolio, but I was working on it, going back and revisiting it for this video tutorial. And I did some color work and I'm like, yeah, I'm good. This looks pretty good for me, right? So I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk away and I'm going to come back in about 5 minutes. Okay. And this is really important. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever that is. There's something that's happening here. It's a little psychological trigger that's happening here that you don't even know that's happening when you're working with color. And I'll explain it when I come back. So I'm going to walk away and I'll be right back. What? Yeah, of course I wear sweatpants. I work from home. All right, so I walked away and I come back and I'm like, whoa, this image is like wildly magenta. What was I thinking, Blake? So I'm gonna explain this to you. I have this pair of sunglasses that I wear quite often while I'm driving. Now, these sunglasses have basically a yellowish type of filter in them. So when I first put these on when I go outside, the whites and even the blues start to look like yellow. And I'm like, oh man, this is too yellow. What's going on here? The first time I put them on, I almost took them back. But then as I started driving with them on after about 5, maybe 7 minutes, everything started to look normal. What the heck is going on there? Well, it's our brain. Our brain is pretty darn smart, where it actually wants to know what white and black are, even when you put a filter over our eyes. Now, our cameras don't adjust like this, but our brain does. It says, wait a second, Blake, I know that that's white. If you put those sunglasses on and looked at my screen door outside, you would see that it's got a yellowish haze to it. But if you stared at it for 5 to 7 minutes with those glasses on, it would start to appear more on the white side. So the same thing happens when we're color grading our images. Things in this image are starting to look normal to me as I'm color grading this. So as I'm color grading and working with color, I gotta be very careful that I don't immediately take the shot that I have here and post it on social media, because someone might say, well, it's a little too pink or magenta there, Blake. What were you thinking? So what I would do here in this case is I'd come back and look at my image and say, okay, yes, this is looking awfully magenta here. Let me go ahead and take a color balance adjustment layer, because that's one of the easiest ones to work with for this. Work in the midtones and offset that magenta by adding a little bit of green to it. Now it's starting to look a little bit normal. Let's take away some of that blue and add a little bit of that yellow to it. And then we'll go into the cyans and maybe add a little bit of cyan to that. Then pop into the highlights here and maybe see what happens as we add a little bit more yellow to those highlights, and then a little bit more red to those highlights. I kind of like that. And then our shadows, let's see if we have any colors that are glaring here that we might need to fix in our shadows. Might need to add a little bit of yellow to those shadows and take away some magenta from those shadows as well. So now, am I done? No, what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna walk away again and I'm gonna come back after working with this so that I don't get too focused on this. Now, in the inspection world, we call this something called a death spiral, where you get this information, this one piece of information, and you dig so far into that piece of information that you don't realize that the actual information that you need to solve the investigation is over here. Right? So I don't want you to death spiral on your color. I want you to walk away. You don't have to collect any evidence, but walk away, come back and see if that image still looks good to you after you've taken some time away from it. Because that'll give our brain some time to adjust to other colors, other lighting. So when we come back and look at it, the things that are wrong in our color will just pop right out in front of us. Now, I know I didn't go too much into technique here. This is all theory type stuff. If you want more stuff with technique on color theory and color grading, click on this playlist here. I've got a whole bunch of videos that'll teach you in-depth ways to work with the tools in Photoshop. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing. I like to take Photoshop, which is a very convoluted piece of software, and try to make it really simple and easy for you to understand.